J.R.R. Tolkien hated democracy. In fact, his opinions and beliefs on how the world should function may sound a little extreme. From reading The Lord of the Rings, you may get a vague idea of what his views are, but in order to truly understand, we'll have to delve deep into his personal letters and most obscure interviews. Tolkien's general inclinations are no secret, and many of them can be felt through the text itself. By just casually reading The Lord of the Rings, you'll start to notice that a certain system of government starts to prevail above all others: monarchy. Within the world of Middle-earth, not only is monarchy the most widespread political system, but it is also a system showcased in a positive and even natural light. Almost all of our protagonists come from an aristocratic background, and the characters that represent their respective monarchies, such as Theoden, Elrond, Galadriel, as well as Aragorn, are meant to be liked by the reader. Monarchy can be found everywhere in their history, in their myths and legends, and in places where monarchy is absent, such as Gondor, decay can be seen. Decay until the return of the king, that is. Monarchy is never questioned in its legitimacy, and at no point is any alternative ever mentioned to replace it. As you can probably tell, Tolkien is a monarchist. You could argue, however, that Saruman is also a monarch, as is Sauron, the god king of his empire, and you would be right. The nuance, however, lies with the amount of power the monarch has, how he acts, and where his legitimacy comes from. Tolkien, while a monarchist, does not believe in an all-encompassing state such as that of Mordor. He's a localist, and from a localist point of view, his ideal state is a weak one. It does not force its way into society, and simply exists to establish a common framework for the people it is made up of, and which promotes their common values, traditions, and beliefs. As the monarch functions through the state, and the state has these characteristics, this is how an ideal monarch in Tolkien's mind functions too. Most importantly, however, and this is what connects this entire discussion to the idea of democracy, the monarch does not choose power, power chooses the monarch. The idea is that the king is born with a duty to serve his people, and is thus less likely to be corrupted by the pursuit of power. In letter 52, Tolkien states that the proper study of man is anything but man, and the most improper job of any man, even saints, is bossing other men. Not one in a million is fit for it, and least of all, those who seek the opportunity. The pursuit of power is one of the fundamental problems that Tolkien views in democracy. He believes that the people who wish to be elected to positions of power are predisposed to perform evil deeds in order to accomplish that goal, and once they do, they will continue to do so in order to retain their position. The corruption of power lies within the heart of the Lord of the Rings, and the One Ring can sway even the most powerful, mightiest, and most pure-hearted of princes. And so imagine what it may do to the demagogues who rely upon the so-called mob for their authority. And speaking of the mob, he was fearful of what he saw as mob rule, an emotional electorate, the tyranny of the majority. He witnessed during the Second World War the amount of his fellow Englishmen and women who advocated for the complete annihilation of the German people. There was a solemn article in the local paper seriously advocating systemic exterminating of the entire German nation. The Germans have just as much right to declare the Poles and Jews exterminable vermin, subhuman, as we have to select the Germans. In other words, no right, whatever they have done. And in case you needed any further proof, in letter 94 he makes his feelings abundantly clear, stating that Mr. Eden in the house the other day expressed pain at the occurrences in Greece, the home of democracy. Is he ignorant or insincere? Demokratia was not in Greek a word of approval, but was nearly equivalent to mob rule, and he neglected to note that Greek philosophers, and far more is Greece the home of philosophy, did not approve of it. And the great Greek states, especially Athens at the time of its high art and power, were rather dictatorships, if they were not military monarchies like Sparta. To summarize, Tolkien views a system that supposedly limits the corruption of power as better to one that he perceives to not only enable it, but also encourage it. Beyond that, in a 1956 interview conducted by Condor magazine, Tolkien reveals a more practical concern he holds about modern democratic systems even beyond their aforementioned immorality. The true equation is democracy equals government by world financiers. The main mark of modern governments is that we do not know who governs. We see the politician and not his backer, still less the backer of the backer, or what is most important of all, the banker of the backer. Enthroned above all in a manner without parallel in the past is the veiled prophet of finance, swaying all men living by a sort of magic, and delivering oracles in a language not understood of the people. As you can see, Tolkien is cynical of the legitimacy of democracy. Even if he could see past the dangers of the mob or the ambitions of the elected, he could not see past what he perceived to be the hypocrisy, lack of transparency, and greed that he felt characterized the modern democracies of the West. He believed that the intentions of the people who actually held power and controlled the lives of each and every one of us, something that they should not be able to do in the first place, originate solely from self-interest. They have no morals, and their god, which is a matter important for Tolkien, is money. Not to mention how distant this veiled machine of governance was to the average person. For Tolkien, these so-called bankers of backers of politicians grew further and further away from the real problems that troubled the very people that voted for these politicians in the first place. They start to function in a language and under a system not understood of the people, and that there is supposed to be democracy. As such, make no mistake and think that Tolkien's dislike of democracy has to do with some sort of fascination with the aristocracy, or that he does not believe in equality for all. The truth is quite the opposite, and equality for Tolkien was fundamental to his wider beliefs and philosophy, originating partly from his strong faith. In letter 163, not that I'm a Democrat, he says, in any of its current uses, except that I suppose we are all equal before the great author. And in letter 186, I am not a Democrat, only because humility and equality are spiritual principles corrupted by the effort to mechanize and formalize them, with the result that we get not universal smallness and humility, but universal greatness and pride, till some orc gets hold of a ring of power, and then we get, and are getting, slavery. His issue with democracy is not equality. His issue is that for him democracy does not provide genuine equality and rights, but rather equality that is weaponized for the purposes of those who greedily hold power and who wish to retain it, whatever the cost may be. This is also one of the reasons why Tolkien hated the idea of identifying a people or a nation with the government or political entity that is the country. There is no such thing. For him, the government or the state, England itself, does not have a consciousness. It is made up of people with sometimes conflicting interests that coexist in what we may call England. And oftentimes the people that make decisions in the name of England do not do it for England, but for their own sake, something connected with his original concern about the ambition of politicians. As such, a political system that presents the state and the government that rules it as the people themselves, as is often the case with democracy, is a grave mistake according to Tolkien. With that in mind, Tolkien makes his political opinions abundantly clear in letter 52, in which he states that my political opinions lean more and more to anarchy, philosophically understood, meaning abolition of control, not whiskered men with bombs, or to unconstitutional monarchy. I would arrest anybody who uses the word state, and after a chance of recantation, execute them if they remained obstinate. Here he obviously exaggerates jokingly in order to make his point. Looking past the humor, however, we get a clearer view of Tolkien's ideals. He feels that the idea of the state, and especially that whose legitimacy stems from the so-called people, may only lead to more and more evil, and it is contradictory to how we're supposed to live as human beings. Instead, he wishes for a monarch whose authority comes from tradition and duty, to guarantee that the freedoms of the individual are protected. An unconstitutional monarchy, not meaning an absolute monarchy, however, as the state itself through which the monarch functions holds no absolute power. Combining his localist, traditionalist, and monarchist beliefs based on his own writings, my interpretation of what his ideal system would be a country like the Shire, ruled by a king like Aragorn. Naturally, however, you may argue that relying upon the competence and goodwill of a single man has its problems too, and you would be right. On that subject, in the same letter, give me a king whose chief interest in life is stamps, railways, or racehorses, and who has the power to sack his vizier if he does not like the cut of his trousers. But of course, the fatal weakness of all that, after all, only the fatal weakness of all good natural things in a bad, corrupt, unnatural world, is that it works and has only worked when all the world is messing along in the same good, old, inefficient human way. Tolkien recognizes that flaw in his system, but he believes that all systems are inherently flawed because people are flawed, and because the world that we live in is flawed alongside us. For him, you're always going to have Isildurs and Boromirs that will be corrupted by the ring, or Denethors that will lose their strength when their people need them most. It's just that the alternative, in his opinion, is not only practically worse, but lacks the morality, tradition, and stability of his alternative, which he feels is, simply put, natural. Massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.